Welcome, everybody. My name's Gary Fortney, and this is The Trend. This is our last episode of the Pam Hupp saga. This has been Pam Hupp month. We've been going over different aspects of Pam Hupp, which most of you are familiar with. We're going to touch just very briefly, on the two other episodes involving Pam Hupp, and this is the final episode on Shirley Neumann, who is the mother of Pam Hupp, who died what we consider under mysterious circumstances at her home. I'd first like to introduce Lieutenant Eric von Alman. Lieutenant von Alman is the commander of the St. Louis County Homicide Unit. Lieutenant von Alman is one of the individuals I think is best to run the homicide unit. He was a detective in the homicide unit, and we actually worked a number of cases together. We actually have an episode of a TV show called True CSI that we filmed regarding a murder case that we worked on together. That's already in the can. It's being edited out of a production company out of Canada. So looking forward to having that episode on within the next couple of months. Eric also has been instrumental as a sergeant in the county homicide unit, and then now as a commander. We'll talk a little bit about the St. Louis County homicide unit, the makeup of the unit, how things work. And we'll talk a little bit also about his involvement in several cases. Our next guest will be Lieutenant Brian Hilke, retired from the O'Fallon, Missouri Police Department. Brian's been very familiar with the Pam Hupp cases. As you know, in the previous episodes, Brian became involved in the knowledge of the death of Betsy Faria, which occurred in Lincoln County. And he actually knows the prosecutor who is currently prosecuting Lincoln County, Mike Wood. The first case that was prosecuted on the Pam Hupp case was done by a separate and another prosecutor. However, Mike Wood, being the prosecutor of Lincoln County, has taken over the prosecution of Pam Hupp for the death of Betsy Faria, in which Betsy Faria's husband was originally found guilty and later in a retrial was found not guilty. And so that was the recharging of Pam Hupp in that case. So let's go back to Lieutenant von Alman a little bit about his background. How many years do you have on the county police, Lieutenant?
Total of about 25 years, closer to 26 years now, actually.
And how many years have you been involved in homicide from a detective, sergeant, and lieutenant aspect?
Estimate about at least 3/4 of that time I was affiliated or was in the Bureau of Crimes Against Persons and homicide unit as far as total amount of years, yeah.
And what brings us a little bit different with this podcast and with this information is we actually have somebody from the St. Louis County Homicide Unit in here who was actually involved in the investigation of the death of Shirley Neumann. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of different podcasts, a lot of different information. So we're going to actually hear from the department that actually is handling the investigation. So let's talk about the makeup a little bit of the homicide unit, Lieutenant. I know things have changed from when you and I were in there because I worked several cases with Lieutenant von Alman.
Correct.
How many detectives do you have total in there?
So we have 2 squads of 9 detectives, to sergeant in charge of each squad. They change shifts every 28 days from days to nights. We handle any suspicious death also that, quite frankly, we don't know what we're getting into. If patrol is called or any other municipality, quite frankly, is called to the scene of something they don't know, they're not sure what they got, Bureau of Crimes Against Persons is called in to help investigate that.
And so from my time being in there, worked with you, and I spent almost 15 years in there, investigate homicides, suicide, accident, natural death, and suspicious deaths.
Correct.
Of both adults and children. Can you tell us a little bit about the family crime unit? Are you under control of the family crime unit?
Yeah, that's composed of basically 2 units within that is domestic violence, the domestic violence unit, and the child abuse unit. There's 5 detectives and a sergeant in the domestic violence unit. Right now, 4 detectives are pretty short-handed in the child abuse unit with one sergeant.
And I think Lieutenant will agree with me that having a separate unit investigating just incident domestic violence is really important.
They do. They have an extremely heavy caseload, and that would probably act. Between all the units are extremely busy within the Bureau, but when you break it down case per detective, I would say domestic violence probably has the highest volume.
What about incidents of child abuse, child neglect? Is that a separate unit? Does that also? What would that come under?
That would come under the child abuse unit. Sergeant Brett Belcher does an outstanding job there. Sergeant Dennis Cook, I should mention too, is in charge of is the supervisor for the domestic violence unit. Sergeant Belcher supervises the child abuse unit. They do handle cases involving minors, minor victims. The one that has really, the type of case other than sexual assault on minors, obvious physical abuse cases, but the one we've really seen an increase in, unfortunately, is exposure to illegal drugs, especially fentanyl, even still cocaine, heroin, and they investigate those as well. If the child was to die as a result of being exposed to an illegal drug or any drug for that matter. In an overdose case, it would go to the homicide unit.
And let me just talk about the importance of what the lieutenant he oversees. Lieutenant oversees all these units. And I know I've mentioned this before. I just want to emphasize one more time. We got to speak for individuals that cannot speak for themselves, right? Let's start with the elderly. If you have an elderly person who has dementia or Alzheimer's being abused in a nursing home, they can't talk, verbalize. They can be assaulted by workers that have some type of things, and Lieutenant von Alman's unit investigates. So we speak for the elderly, can't speak for themselves. So next are the mentally ill. You'll have somebody who may have a mental illness who can't verbally or tell who may be abusing them, and so we speak for them. And how about children? And again, I can't emphasize enough.
Sure. And unfortunately, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the CAC, the Children's Advocacy Center.
Yep.
That's their specialty, is interviewing very young children who may have diagnosed disabilities that doesn't allow them to be as verbal or as forthcoming, and just, like I said, young children. They do forensic interviews. They're specialists, and they do an outstanding job of getting that information. But ultimately, it's up to us in the Bureau as police officers to speak for those, to help speak for those that can't speak for themselves, like you said.
His job is so important, and as I said, I got to hand it to the lieutenant and the county police department for putting Lieutenant von Alman in there from a detective sergeant and now a lieutenant. And we'll see if he gets a little bit further in the department. He deserves it, of course. I think he deserves a little of the promotion here. I've worked enough with him, and I know his aptitude. So one last thing I'm going to talk about is you can't speak for themselves. I'm not trying to be funny here. Animals. There's all kinds of animal abuse that takes place, and animals cannot speak for themselves. And I think sometimes things progress from animals to humans regarding children and other abuse that takes place. We've actually trained the Humane Society through Vista Law Enforcement training in the Humane Society in Brian. We've done that many times, and they do God's work for the animals. So I just want to say that along. So thanks so much for the background. Again, St. Louis County Police is very fortunate to have Lieutenant von Alman in charge of the crimes against persons, which comprises homicide, sexual assault, robbery, child abuse, family crime, and all that ties in under his command. So very fortunate to have him in charge. So Lieutenant Hilke, he retired from the O'Fallon Police Department, and Lieutenant became involved originally with Pam Hupp. I know we're going to go back just a little bit from the previous episodes. Lieutenant, why don't you talk a little bit about how you first became aware of this and what happened originally out in Lincoln County?
Sure. Excuse me. So, unlike St. Louis County, where you guys don't utilize major case squad, you guys basically do all your investigations in-house. I know you guys supplement the squad, but you do your own investigations. As far as the initial investigation in Lincoln County, one of my detectives actually was assigned to the Betsy Faria homicide in Lincoln County from the major case squad. That's kind of how my knowledge of the whole Pam Hupp saga. I like that word saga. It feels like a saga sometimes. That's how we became involved.
And it progressed from an incident in Lincoln County that Betsy Faria's husband, Russ Faria, was originally convicted. I would say under mysterious circumstances, in my opinion. I'll just leave it at that, okay? But I can say that because he was ended up found not guilty in a retrial that took place. And who was the attorney on his retrial case, Brian?
You talking about his attorney?
Yeah.
So that was Joel Schwartz.
Yeah, Joel Schwartz really stuck with it with Russ Faria, and he was found not guilty in a subsequent trial. And we're not getting too much into this, but what is the current pending status of the death of Betsy Faria?
So as you mentioned earlier, Pam Hupp has been charged with the murder of Betsy Faria, and there's been a lot of changes in judges. A lot of judges have recused themselves. The attorneys have asked judges to recuse themselves. So, that's been part of the delay. I believe also part of the delay has been the fact that she's being represented by the public defender's office. They have a special unit that defends death penalty cases. So I know their docket is extremely full. I believe, based off the information that I've read and been aware of, I believe she's probably set for trial somewhere around 2026. And of interest is actually, it was originally moved from St. Charles County to, I believe, Springfield, Greene County, and then they did another change of venue, and now it's back in St. Charles County.
Yeah, change of venues, that happens. I've had several cases involving change of venue. It's a lot of work to do this, but I know it's taking some time, but I'd rather get it done the right way. So I think the attorneys just handle it. I know Mike Wood's a pretty driven attorney, a prosecutor, and so he's doing the right thing there by taking his time to make sure we do it the right way.
Yeah, and he actually brought in a special prosecutor that pretty much focuses just on the Pam Hupp case. He's actually a former prosecutor with St. Charles County, Delaney Harms, who's really, really good at what he does.
Excellent. So let's move forward then to another case that happened in the city that you were involved with. And regarding the murder that took place in O'Fallon, Missouri, there was a special done with that. Renee Zellweger starred as Pam Hupp, right?
Yes, she did.
And that was a multi-episode saga that took place. Brian was played by an actor in a TV show. Do you remember the actor's name who played you?
Kyle Carbon.
Okay. So, anyways, we'll see what actors play us in our show. Eric, with people. So
Yeah. Hopefully, I don't know if we'll get a say-so in it or not, but
I'll try. I got connections.
I did not. I do know that when my wife got to see the actor who was playing me, he has a couple of, let's say, revealing photos on his Instagram. She was looking, she's like, boy, that doesn't look like you. I appreciate that. So maybe you'll get somebody that has, like an 8-pack, full suit of hair and all that stuff for you.
For me, I've got somebody out of a nursing home to play me. I'll leave it at that. Well, let's transfer to your case in O'Fallon, Brian. A little bit from the beginning there, and then we're going to jump right into the Shirley Neumann. Then we get a little bit of background about how the cases happened here. So how would you first notified? What happened regarding this case? I know we're covering ground again, but...
Yeah, so like we talked in previous episode, it was August 2016. I remember I was warming my lunch up, and unlike St. Louis County, we don't get too many home invasions. I know that's probably a little bit more of a forte for Eric there. So when the call came out that we had a home invasion, obviously that piqued my attention because that's not something that generally happens in O'Fallon. As the 911 call and the dispatch proceeded, I remember hearing that dispatch put out that the homeowner had actually shot the intruder, quote unquote intruder. And at the time I was thinking, it's a stand your ground, castle doctrine, will be cleared up, ready to go home. I'll make it home for dinner by, 6, 7 o'clock. And,
we know how
last words, yes. And once we got to the scene, and part of the reason why I thought that is when I asked who the complaint was, who actually did the shooting, they said her last name was Huff, Huff. When we got to the scene, I was informed that was incorrect, and it was actually Hupp, Hupp.
Did that ring a bell at the time, or?
Yes, it did. And everybody thinks when I tell this story that I'm making it up, but I did actually turn to my lieutenant at the time and say, we're going to be on Dateline. And he kind of looked at me weird, and I'm like, trust me, it's going to happen. It's going to be an interesting ride to see how this plays out.
So your detectives you responded to the scene.
Yeah. So we kind of split up the duties. My lieutenant at the time went back to the station with Pam to do the interview with detectives, and I stayed at the crime scene.
Did she do an interview? Did she actually talk?
She did.
Yeah, something.
Yeah, she. What was interesting is obviously we recorded the interview. One of the first things she said is, "Hey, are you guys recording? Because that guy on Channel 2, I don't like him, and he always puts me on TV."
Interesting way to start. So at the scene, again, I don't want to cover too much. We've already done in the previous episode, but suspicions about the case?
Yeah. And, that's the thing that we've talked about in prior cast is, one of the things that I always told my detective, I'm sure Eric probably does the same thing, is follow the facts. So long as you follow the facts, more times than not, you're going to be fine. Don't get preconceived ideas. Don't be biased. Let the facts fall where they may, and wherever it takes you, that's generally where the truth lies. So at the time, we were treating her as a victim, because that's how it was reported. And it wasn't until all these things came up in the investigation that we actually determined that she was, in fact, the suspect.
All right. Was the case adjudicated? That's something you can see. I got a master's degree, huh? Adjudicated.
Can you spell it?
Yeah. No, I can't. So interesting. Case adjudicated. What happened to the final end of that case?
Yeah, so a week after the shooting happened, we were actually able to get a arrest warrant, and we took her into custody. It was about 3 years later when she actually pled guilty to murder. She made an Alfred plea, which kind of disappointed me. I did want her to get up there and say that she did it. For those that aren't familiar, an Alfred plea, basically, she agreed that there was enough evidence to convict her, but made no admissions or confessions as far as that she was responsible.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting about the Alfred plea, but it's still a plea.
It's still a plea. We still got a conviction.
What year was that? Do you remember the date?
2019 is when she pled guilty.
How about when the incident happened?
Our incident happened in 2016.
And when did the incident happen out in Lincoln County?
That was around Christmas time of 2011.
Okay, so we got a little timeline set up, right? 11, right?
Yes.
Next date?
16.
16?
And then she pled guilty in 19.
That's interesting. We're going to talk about something that happened in October of 2013. I'll move on a little bit here, all right? So let me jump in here about the case of Shirley Neumann. Shirley Neumann was Pam Hupp's mother. Shirley lived in a retirement facility, healthcare facility for elderly. She lived on the 3rd floor, is that correct?
That's correct.
Lived on the 3rd floor, and Shirley Neumann was found dead in an area below where her apartment was, and some railing had been broken out near where her body was found. And that was on October 31st she was found. We're able to determine, actually the investigators, that she was last seen by by Pam Hupp, who was her daughter. And that was on October 30th at about 8 o'clock p.m. Right, so that is about the time gap from 8 o'clock p.m. on the 30th until her body was found the 1st.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And one thing I got to hand to St. Louis County Police, when the call came out, it didn't come out for an accidental.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how the original call that the responding officers got was coded, or how classified. But yeah, it would have been a sudden death or accidental death, something along those lines.
And her body was still on the scene because medical personnel came out. They found no signs of life, and she was left at the scene. St. Louis County Police Crimes Against Persons / homicide detectives did respond, and they conducted an investigation, which I considered an adequate investigation at the time, all right? And everybody says, well, why didn't they jump more on it since it was Pam Hupp's mother? Well, look at the two different last names. We have Shirley Neumann and Pam Hupp. At the time, linking Hupp to Neumann, it just was unknown at the time, okay? So, and that was before the death of Lewis, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so again, we only had the one incident that was in Lincoln County. So St. Louis County homicide did look at the case eventually. Okay, the case was processed at the scene, correct?
Correct.
And the crime scene investigators came and they took photographs and documented.
Correct. Yep.
And they documented her body. There's photographs of her body where it was found, the position it was found.
And of course the railing and everything they've covered everything from the point where she would have her residence to down to the where she was.
Yeah, all documented again. We have, and that's all documented. And they did send out the St. Louis County Medical Examiner's Office.
Correct. Yes.
Dr. Lindsay Trommel responded. She is actually a forensic anthropologist. We know her very well from our workings at Vista Law Enforcement Training. And she did the on-scene investigation as what's called the medical legal death investigator. And after on-scene, Shirley Newman's body was transported to the St. Louis County Medical Examiner's Office for a post-mortem examination, also called an autopsy. Now, in case like this, as we all three know, think about all the experience all three of us have investigating deaths, all right? Think of all the multitude, almost 100 years, let's say, of death investigation.
Well, that's just you, right?
Thanks a lot, Brian. I love you, brother. Hey, I'm collecting Social Security and you're not.
You're right.
Okay, good. So the reason they would transport somebody elderly is because of trauma. If you have somebody deceased in bed who's 80 years old, let's say, and there's no trauma, they had a history of medical, they do what's called a direct release to the funeral home based upon the family understanding that, all right? And so we agree with her being transported to medical examiner's office.
Absolutely, in this case. And when you don't, this was different. Than 77-year-old woman, yes, but circumstances dictated further investigation by the medical examiner's office.
Yeah,
they did.
And again, St. Louis County's credit, they did a full scene investigation. Full investigation. At a medical examiner's office, at a post-mortem / autopsy, they have final rulings at place. There's such thing as cause of death and manner of death. And so cause of death is what actual caused the death of the individual. What is the actual circumstances that made the individual die? And that's the first thing. Then they have what's called manner of death. There could probably be a dozen or dozens of cause of death: drowning, blunt force trauma, stabbing, shooting, all these other things, all right? That's a cause. Manner of death, there's 5. There's homicide, suicide, natural, accidental, and undetermined. Pathologists hate putting undetermined because that's where they're saying they don't know what happened, all right? Was there a cause of manner of death originally after they did the autopsy?
There was, and I believe the original cause was accidental.
Yeah, the cause of death was blunt force trauma, to the chest. Right. That's the cause. And manner, what Lieutenant said, was accidental. So they determined blunt force trauma to the chest and then accidental. That's where the case pretty much was at the time, right? And again, it's all documented. They wrote reports. Everything's been well documented. Again, they did the right thing. They did good on-scene investigation. What changed about this case here a little bit?
Well, it started based on Brian's case and both homicide cases. Eventually, because I think the second one was in 16.
Yeah,
in 2016. Obviously, Shirley's death was in 2013. So this was 11 years ago. A lot changes where we are now with how news gets around and how I know it's only 11 years, but how police departments share information and so whether you read the news or how in touch you stay, or whether you got a friend at one department or somebody sharing information with you. We didn't immediately know who Shirley Neumann was.
Well, think about this too. It's a different county completely.
Correct.
Joining the Lincoln County.
Yeah, and we're almost down, and where Shirley was, we're almost to Jefferson County.
Yeah.
So still in St. Louis County, obviously, but it did once the case and Fallon came, Pam's name came, and there was a relationship established. It garnered more media attention, more pressure, and we took another look at it in 2016.
And so, yeah, that's the thing is we really don't react to the media, but
Right.
media had some good points. We agree with that. Take a look.
Yeah.
And just a couple things I want to point out is, one, I do know that I can't remember who specifically from your office, but you guys reached out relatively quick after we got our charges issued regarding your case, because I know that you guys took another fresh look at it after we charged her. The other thing too, I want the listing public to know too, is that it's real easy, because I've been the subject of where people have gone back and looked at my cases and said, hey, why didn't you do this? How did you miss that? It's real easy to go back and look at cases with 20/20 vision, hindsight vision. And one of the things I wanted to mention, because you mentioned, how we get our news now, whether it's through podcasts or social media, even though that I was aware of, Pam Hupp with the original Betsy Faria case, I never heard anything about Shirley Neumann dying in 2013. I know none of my detectives were, because that was relatively new to us when we actually found out about that.
Yeah, and even further, like I think we were talking about earlier, with any case, this one no different. However, it's whatever the manner of death ends up being, whether it is homicide or accidental, undetermined, whatever. You always go back, and we all three of us know this. You look back at a case, and it could be as airtight at the time, and you think you covered everything, and then you start typing that 100-page report, 200-page report.
Yeah,
you're like,
mine's 200. Yeah.
Yeah, you're correct. Yeah. Loved reading them. Loved reading them for you. No, you wrote great reports, and you say, why didn't I think of this? It's not necessarily that you could have done something better. It's just that you could have done something else, something different, right? Something
Every
additional.
case, though, isn't it?
Every case. It's not. I won't speak for property crimes or fraud investigators, but I would say that's police work across the board. When you're an investigator at any level, you think about that. But back to your original question. Try not to bow to media pressure, but they did. You're right. They did. The news did bring up some good points.
Yeah, good points.
Stuff to look at again.
And, we just want a case to slip through the cracks. Why not take another look? And,
of course.
Again, you got other cases going on, but that's what the St. Louis County Police did. They took another look at the case. I would just go back a little bit and compliment the St. Louis County Police Department, and that's called the clearance rate on homicides. A lot of departments, not every department, tracks their success rate of how they actually come up to a conclusion in homicide cases compared to the national average, which it's okay. St. Louis County Police excels. Talk about the clearance rate for you guys for the homicide.
I'll talk specifically about 2024. We had a clearance rate of in the mid-90s, like around 93, 94%, if I'm not mistaken. Now, that includes unincorporated St. Louis County. We also investigate smaller municipalities that don't have the manpower or the resources to investigate crimes such as a serious crime. It takes a lot of time and manpower as a homicide does. So we had about almost 70, I think right around 70 murders last year that we investigated as a department. And our overall clearance rate was about 93%.
That's definitely fantastic. So
it definitely blows the national average out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does make you feel good, and ideally it's 100%, right? You talk to victims' families that are extremely thankful. Some, unfortunately, don't really care, and it was just reality. But the ones that just are really appreciative of the work, and then it makes you think of the one or two or three or eight that slipped through the cracks, and you want desperately to solve those as well. But
and that's I can commend the men and women of the St. Louis County Police Department for that clearance rate, all the way from the uniformed officer to the investigator to the prosecutor too.
There's a lot of moving parts, and
you can't do these by yourself. We all know that, right?
Crime lab and crime scene unit, and like you said, the prosecuting attorney's office. Absolutely.
Well, let's jump back to Shirley a little bit, and we may have, like I say, some things that we see in the case. I consider a few things suspicious about the case, and let's talk about that. Eventually, was the case reclassified by the St. Louis County Medical Examiner's Office?
Yes, they did. They reclassified it to undetermined for the manner of death,
which they can do. They can change if additional information comes up. So it went from from an accident to undetermined. And undetermined pretty much means they don't know what happened. They don't have the facts. We all can agree, right? In this room, we don't know. We don't know.
Correct.
Still don't know the state. But there are indicators that we do look at. I think there's been things on TV involving rail testing through one of the news stations. There's been things on TV about some of the things that Pam Hupp said during the investigation. And so those are pretty much analyzed. But then I look at a couple of things with the autopsy report, all right, which I've had a chance to know a little bit more about, let's say. One thing that kind of bothers me is, number one, is The thinking is /was/is that she slipped, fell through the railing head first, and fell to the ground, and that's where she was found dead. And the railing was broken out to a point of being able to go through the railing. I look at injuries on the body. Now, she did have some injuries to the top of her head area, but I look for any facial injuries. And if she's going to go through the railing, I would expect to have some type of facial injuries, scraping against those metal bars. And I've read the report, and I've looked at pictures, actually. And I did not see anything with facial injuries. Okay, now a head injury can happen with her falling, because if she went head first and she was found on her back, if I'm not mistaken,
That's
right?
correct.
So she would have hit her head and rolled, which could account for the injury in her upper head area, which is the frontal area. But with no injuries to the side of her face, that kind of bothers me a little bit, okay, about, and any other injuries that show evidence of scratches, gashes, lacerations, or incision injuries. So that kind of piqued my interest a little bit. And so that's one thing that I've been looking at here a little bit. Any thoughts about that at all?
No, you're right. I can't argue with that at all, that you would expect. And I think the audience should know, too, that if I'm not mistaken, and I haven't seen, we have or did have the actual railing. We seized the railing that was broken out on Shirley's residence on the balcony there. I have not seen that in person, but it looks to me in the photographs that, if I'm not mistaken, and you would know, you guys probably know, the top railing was intact, the beam that ran across. That is a little strange too, and I don't want to say to excuse that, or I think I have a different thought on that, but I do agree with what you're saying about the lack of injuries. And to the shoulders, clothing was intact, nothing was torn, if I remember correct. Nothing caught on the
railing.
On the railing.
I didn't see any fibers on there or anything.
No, I don't think so. No.
And just kind of a little bit bothersome too to me is blunt force trauma to the chest, but she was found on her back. And so again, when we look at the autopsy reports, they always have the cause that then they go through the internal organs. I'm not going to get too graphic on the podcast here. They do an internal exam and external examination of all the internal organs. And blunt force trauma to the chest, but she's found on her back. And I just don't know how that would have happened with her going through the railing. I expect blunt force trauma to the head if she landed on her head. So that's another thing there. Brian, anything to add about that?
No, I think you can look at any case, and, I always used to, I wouldn't, cops have gallows humor, right? So, that's how especially some of us older law enforcement deal with the stresses of the job, is gallows humor. And, I used to tell my detectives, if you ever work an accidental death, the suicide, and the family's not telling you it's not a murder, then it's a murder. So, because generally we get that from a lot of families where, well, they would never have committed suicide, or there's no way it was an accident. And it's easy to go back and look at these things, like you said, it's it is 11 years, almost 12 years, and nitpick and say, well, you could do that with any of my cases. You could go back and say, hey, why didn't you do this? Or what about that? I just, I want to make sure that everybody understands that, it wasn't like there wasn't an investigation done. It's real easy to go back in hindsight and say, well, why didn't you do that? So, a lot of things that we're pointing out or talking about, we have the convenience of time and hindsight. When you don't have that at the time, sure, could you have done this different or another way? Absolutely.
Well, no matter how long you've been doing it, how long you've been investigating or whatever, you never know everything, right? So if there's something you can learn, and you don't make the same mistake twice, you learn and you move on. I don't care how long you've done this job. And we all know some investigators that have investigated hundreds, if not thousands of homicides, and they would probably tell you that they know dang near everything, but
we're always learning.
Always learning.
I got a lot of time in there. I was hoping I could still have the record for the amount of time. I think somebody's creeped up on my record for longevity in there. So
there's been some guys and gals have been in there for a while now, so knocking on your door.
Another thing is, I'll talk about my own perspective on the case. I think all of us, is the toxicology. Every time they do an autopsy, they do toxicology, which is analysis for toxins, chemicals in the victim's body. There's different ways they can do that. They can do it through urine, blood, tissue, or vitreous. And vitreous is a clear fluid out of the eyes that's extracted at autopsy to do an analysis, all right? So was the toxicology positive or negative?
Positive.
And what did they find in her system?
They found an unusually, I think it was 0.8 something percent, milligrams or whatever the measurement was for Ambien, which is, I'm sure everybody knows, is a sleep aid.
You have nanograms, the next is micrograms and milligrams. So
it was, I think that was, what they say, 8 times the
8 times the normal dosage unit, called the dosage unit. That kind of piqued my interest a little bit, about 8 times. Now, let me tell you right now, I know for a fact some elderly people will take too much by accident because they do their own dosage, okay? If you don't have somebody actually administer it, they could take 2 or 3 days worth at one time. So we're not saying anything there, but that's a possibility. But then the other possibility is, was she given the drugs? Can somebody say, here, take these, take this? And elderly people, they're thinking, caregivers, and they start taking the drugs. So we know we had a pretty pronounced overdosage use of Ambien, which is basically a sleeping medication. And that is documented at autopsy and in the toxicology report. Brian, any thoughts about that part of it?
Yeah, and that's the thing, too. You can take one little thing and, even with our case, or things that we would look at, especially early on, go like the 911 call with Pam Hupp. It didn't sound right. But that's just one piece, right? You can't make a determination just based off the same thing. Like in this case, you could look at that and say, she was obviously drugged, but you don't know that. It's just one piece of the investigation. You can't really just focus on one aspect. And I think that was part of the problem with the original Lincoln County investigation, was they really focused on Russ Faria's 911 call. Does it sound weird? Yes. But does that mean he killed his wife? No.
And again, duress makes people do different things, right? Duress, making a phone call.
Yeah, everybody reacts differently to stressful distressors, of course, yeah.
So every case that we've worked, right, guys, and the numerous dozens and dozens, hundreds of murder cases we've either been the lead detective or assisting on, there's always has to be a motive, right? And there has to be a motive. And we looked at that also, a motive for the death of Shirley Neumann. Guys, have we ever come up where there could be a possible motive? What do you think?
Yeah. She was going to, her and her siblings, or I know she had at least one brother. We interviewed him in 2016 during the second investigation. I don't recall if he was ever spoken to in 2013 or not, but regardless, yeah, she was going to receive pretty fair amount. I don't know if around $130,000 would have been her share of the life insurance plus family assets. Yeah.
Brian, the motive for the killing of Betsy Faria, what do you think the motive was there?
Well, I think even like in our case, it all revolves around money.
So insurance policy?
Yeah, so obviously with the insurance policy in Betsy Faria's case, with ours, I believe it was an intent to distract that investigation, and I believe she thought that Russ was going to try to come for his money, for the insurance money, and I think she wanted to kind of shift the attention back to him and away from her. So I think everything that she's been involved in has some kind of element of greed, of money.
And to tie this in, didn't Betsy change her life insurance policy to Pam Hupp being the beneficiary?
Yeah, it was several days before she was killed.
Several days before she was killed. So then we have a motive there. And that, again, that's another piece of the puzzle that ties our thoughts into the Shirley Neumann case, because she was a beneficiary on life insurance, okay? Now, let me commend Lieutenant here real quick in the county police, all right? I mean, just to come in here and talk about the case, I have to commend them for. And what are we after this whole thing? All right, that's it. And we searched the truth, and we've all been wrong in some assessments before. We've been right. We've had different thought processes, and to have the county police still looking at it, they still look at it. We brought up some facts, and to have Lieutenant agree to come here and talk to us about the case, to me, is an aspect that you have to congratulate the county police on, about keeping an open mind. Now, we have our own thoughts about what happened, and can piece it together, but you kind of see all of our thought process, truth on every case that we're looking at. So, Lieutenant, anything you want to add a little bit here?
I think a little bit of background into Shirley Neumann's, her medical history.
Sure.
Without going into deep, I don't have access to her medical records. Obviously, I'm not going that deep, but you had a 77-year-old woman who, and again, Brian said at the beginning, follow the facts. These are just more facts, and I don't mean to sway anybody in one direction or another.
We love the thought process. That's what it takes.
You had a 77-year-old woman who just came home from the hospital because she's got dementia and she's prone to falls. We can't ignore that, and that's something that's got to be considered. Again, I say that not trying to say that she tripped over the threshold. I don't know. I have opinions, thoughts, and theories, but I think we all do.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a weird one. This was before there were, not to say there would have been some anyway, but we have great access in most of our homicide investigations. Now we got, the RIC camera, the Regional Intelligence and Information Center's got cameras all over St. Louis County. You got the Real-Time Crime Center. You can't do anything hardly anymore if you're driving a car, even on foot, and not be captured somewhere on video, let alone the Ring doorbell cameras, people's personal surveillance cameras. We didn't have any of that then. It was, whatever time this happened, which, as we stated in the beginning, as you stated, Gary, in the beginning, would have been between 8 o'clock p.m. and roughly 7 a.m. The following morning on October 30th. Nobody saw anything. We recanvassed. We back twice of the original time. None of the employees saw anything. We covered what doors were unlocked and what doors the public had access to. But I just wanted to include a little bit of the background of Shirley.
Oh, absolutely. It could have been accident. We just don't know.
We don't
know. But again, suspicious to me, it's suspicious. I think we can all agree based on the totality of the circumstance.
Yeah, I don't see how you could call it anything else but that. It definitely falls into the suspicious category.
Do we all agree we don't want to accuse anybody if they didn't do something wrong? All right, that's the thing.
Sure.
Now we're looking at how evidence take place. Brian, any thoughts here?
I just appreciate Eric coming on. Like I said,
Sure.
I've been in that place before where I've had other entities or other people come in and look at specific cases because they thought maybe you did something wrong or you didn't do the right thing. And it's challenging to be on that side. So I appreciate that.
If I, and then in turn, the detectives and the sergeants that I am responsible for supervising can learn something, and I'm not too proud to have anybody. Besides, I didn't write any of the reports.
Maybe we should have started with
Think about being a student, you don't write reports.
Yeah, I just sign off on them.
Regarding this case, while we want interest, we'd like to know what happened. I mean, when we do cases on here, we have the ones that are already solved, the ones that are concluded, like a Lewis Grumpheimer, that's done. If anybody knows anything about the case here that wants to come forward, in my opinion, on every single murder case I've worked, somebody sees something,
Mm-hmm.
all right? And some people might be afraid to come forward. Some people might be afraid about they don't want their name involved, and these are to generate interest again, to help the St. Louis County Police out and maybe have some conclusions. Again, there's a lot of podcasts, a lot of newspaper articles, a lot of people's opinions. I like working more from a factual basis, but again, we do have our opinions inside. We can keep that going, but gotta go where the facts lead us, as Brian said before, and which Eric agreed on. And I think overall for the skill of the investigators to actually do a good report, a thorough investigation up to this point. And keep in mind, too, the main person we want to talk to is Pam Hupp. Is she going to talk to us?
No, not about this case. We even went as far as contacting her attorney at the time, and he said that he goes, I'll ask her, and he supposedly did, but of course she's not gonna.
All I can say is if you talk to her, don't let her have a ballpoint pen.
It'll be number 2 around her neck. So yeah, that was discussed in the previous episode. So
yeah,
regarding the death of Shirley Neumann, we all know that there's probably more evidence out there, right, or information. Let's keep apart from physical evidence. Evidence can be information also. And let's talk about the place where she died. It's not an isolated house by itself in some area, right?
No, it's a retirement community. It's set up like a multi-unit apartment building.
But is it full of working class individuals who work every day?
These are people that have probably passed that stage in their lives.
Elderly people. They're usually inside more. They're not really looking out the windows. Some are not even able to move around in their apartments. We understand by not having many witnesses based upon the location where this happened at. But we do have workers, and workers go up and down the halls all the time. We do have people driving in and out of the complex to visit their elderly family members.
And one of the things, too, if I remember right, the weather was kind of nasty that night, correct?
The time of back in 2013, yes, I believe it was.
Yes,
I think so.
It wasn't like it was a nice warm day where people are walking out.
No, it was obviously late in the fall and Halloween or the day before, and I think that's correct. There was not conducive to outdoor activities for sure.
And the place that they live, it's not like they're under 24/7 watch. It's kind of like more of an assisted living.
That's correct. Yeah, she lived alone. Pam was there, would come from time to time. It was unknown even if there was one, if I remember correctly, there was only one main access door that the public, there were other doors, but they were keyed, and we couldn't get an answer even as to who might have had that wasn't something that was tracked. So.
Yeah, I would assume there was, like you mentioned earlier, there's no video surveillance.
No.
I don't think they even kept a log of
They did not.
2 things I want to key on real quick about this is the railing. I'll talk about that second, but I want to talk about cell phone tracking. We're allowed to do pretty well. Again, I worked for the Drug Enforcement Administration Task Force and Intelligence, and that was the infancy of being able to track people's locations through cell phones. Technology's changed from when I was at the DEA to where it is now, all right? St. Louis County Police did try to subpoena the records. They tried to get information on cell phone tracking of Pam Hupp's location. A problem is they only keep the data so long, and it was more archaic data. It wasn't up to, is what it is. That's pretty much the case. You guys did right?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
And I think we even tried so far as to get a search warrant. But again, 11, 12 years ago, it's amazing how different things are now. You get a lot more information with a lot fewer search warrants, subpoenas, whatever now on cell phone and PLI with precision locate information than you did then, and it wasn't maintained.
But you guys tried. They did everything.
We tried.
And I know that for a fact. The county police did do as much as they could for the technology and the requiring of data points for her tracking her cell phone. It just wasn't available.
We did. And, that's the one thing would it have helped if we could have gotten that or would have been able to access that data? Of course, it wouldn't hurt, that's for sure. But I think it's pretty known fact that Pam was the last to see her mother, as far as we know, right? And that was about 8:00 on the 30th when she left.
The cell phone data won't tell us what happened.
No,
it'll give maybe indicators what to look further.
It can help narrow down the timeline, which is important. It definitely doesn't hurt in an investigation.
And I guess when you speak about that, as far as we know, she was the last one that saw her alive. Her mom was a rather larger individual.
Yeah,
and I would assume that if there was some kind of unnatural cause that led to her death, that it would take somebody with some relative strength to be able to either throw her over or through those bars.
I'm glad you brought that up, Ryan. That was one of the same things that Gary and I had discussed too, is that, I don't think, and you've met Pam, I never have. If she walked in here right now, which I don't think is going to happen, but I'd know who she was.
We'd have to call DOC.
Yeah, somebody's not doing a very good job. But I can't imagine. It's hard. It would be difficult for me or any of us to pick up a 217-pound body who presumably isn't just going to let you do harm to them and toss them through the railing.
Yeah.
Can it be done? Are there other ways? Of course.
Thought is, kicking out the rails.
Yeah.
Kicking out the rails until you have a big enough hole and dragging her and over the side, over the top. So.
And of course, just based on what I know of your investigation, we're talking about a very manipulative person who determined who could easily, if she can do what she did to the other two victims.
Sure. But
she could have gotten her mom out on the.
Sure, but and again, we have the benefit of hindsight too. At the time, especially if the investigators aren't aware of the Lincoln County case, why would you think that a daughter would go through all that to stage a murder?
Murder of families as old as the human race. It's hard to do. It's one of the it's interviewing many suspects, as we all have in a very varying cases. I found, I don't know if you two agree, that it's hard to give up family if you're going to come in on the killer and it's your cousin or your brother. It's hard, and it's got to be, therefore, I would think, even harder to do away with a family, especially your own mother. Obviously, we've seen worse. We've seen much worse, so we know it's possible, and I don't mean to discount it at all.
And one of the things too is, if somebody, and again, I know Gary mentioned about people coming forward. I don't think, Eric, I think I can speak for you, Eric. You don't want people coming forward with their theories or beliefs, but if they have direct knowledge,
absolutely,
that could shed some more light on what did happen.
Yes,
you guys are more than willing to listen to that.
And if they're afraid of, like Gary said, both you said, if they're afraid of because this is a very high profile, going back to the word saga, with everything to do with Pam Hupp, call Crime Stoppers. If you have good information, and it checks out and it helps, and not only are you being a good citizen, can potentially get paid for being a good citizen.
Right. Still offer rewards.
They do.
What if I just touch on the railing real quick, then we're going to close it down here. Do you guys still have the railing, in evidence?
I know in 2016 we did. It's almost 9 years ago.
I know they had it last year actually too. So.
Okay, then as far as I know, still would.
You think any more could be done with that? Just a thought. I mean,
we had. Yeah, the answer is yes. To my understanding, the company that manufactured that is not in business anymore. We had a structural engineer take a look at, and he couldn't really make a determination one way or another. He said he would need, to be, these engineers are different. They're any engineers that are
by themselves.
They think differently. And because I've had some detectives,
best engineers out there. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But, he said that if he could get the exact same railing, he could probably put together some test.
And part of the issue too is, if I remember right, is that the balusters, the railing was totally replaced, so it's not like you can even go back to.
No, and even if it was, we actually, I think we explored trying to get it to seize a comparable railing for testing from another adjacent unit, and we couldn't get a search warrant or compel a judge to let us seize that.
I wouldn't mind, like I say, taking a look at the railing. That's the only, I think, piece of physical evidence that would be out there. Again, I know you guys have already done the examination. It just interests me pretty much about the railing aspect.
It's a key part of it. Yeah, definitely.
Let's close this down by saying one thing from a personal basis. St. Louis County Police Department is lucky to have you as in charge of homicide. We've worked together a lot, not just one case, multiple cases. And the one he worked with me on, the Melanie Breckel case, one of the most, it's a heartbreaking case to both of us. Again, they're going to have a TV episode on True CSI about that. I think it's Discovery Channel. And they're going to talk about it for about an hour. But that shows the determination we had as investigators. Brian had in his cases to get to the truth. It takes a certain drive to do this. We see death every day, right, Eric? Every day you see death. And people ask how I dealt with it. And my perspective was I was really never haunted or worried about the gore or the death because I know I'm there for the victim. I'm there for the victim over their body. I'm trying to have them tell me a story about what happened to them. All right. If I know I'm doing it for the victim, I can handle that. The sleepless nights I had, and I think Brian and Eric can agree, laying there at night, what am I missing? What can I do more? And I would lay all night long. I couldn't sleep a lot of nights because what am I missing? And that goes right now. What are we missing? What else could be out there? And so I can't thank Eric enough, and they're lucky to have you in charge of homicide, and I think you deserve to go other place in the department before you retire. I know you're getting close. And also thanks to the St. Louis County Police Department for my career, and I was only a detective, but I say only. I had a fantastic career, but I did not want to get promoted. I felt my niche, and I had a chance to work with very, very, very professional men and women in the department. My wife's retired from there as a sergeant, and a lot of things that bring us close. Brian's retirement and his time on the O'Fallon Police Department. So I want to thank Brian Hilke for being here. From a little background. Okay, just going to close our episode. And Lieutenant Eric von Alman, the commander of St. Louis County Homicide Unit. And I promise you this, if we get more information or see a need for an additional episode, we'll be on here again. We'll talk, okay? And for that time, do your own research, look up, pick out the good stuff, leave the bad stuff behind. And again, looking for the truth is the main thing we want in all these cases. So thank you so much. My name's Gary Fortney, and this was an episode of the podcast, The Trend. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into this episode of The Trend. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please feel free to reach out to us at The Trend's website at www.trendmediallc.com, or you can email us at any time at thetrend@trendmediallc.com. We welcome everybody's comments, suggestions, or reviews. Don't forget to stay connected with us on social media. Follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Trend Media Podcast, and join the conversation on Facebook by searching The Trend Podcast. Check out our Amazon page through the link on our website, where you'll find some of our recommended products. We'll be back next time with more true crime stories, insights on law enforcement trends, and current trends with our region and the people we serve. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay part of The Trend.